Hello and a warm welcome to everybody. We would like to wish all of you a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Stephen Wright, and I'm from Maximum Yield. For more than 18 years, Maximum Yield has been the go-to source of information on controlled environment gardening for modern growing professionals around the world. Just a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording as soon as we are able to. Don't forget that this webinar is for you, the audience, so we'll keep it interactive. Get your questions into the GoToWebinar console as we go, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Today, we're proud to present Grow Smarter, Technology Advances in Agriculture, a Maximum Yield webinar presented by VividGro. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenters, David Friedman and Randy Shipley. David is the CEO of VividGro, a spin-off of Lighting Science Group Corporation, leader in advanced applications of LED technology. David is now exploring the new frontier of the business of agriculture technology, an industry that is exploding with the recent legalization of cannabis across Canada and the effort to feed an ever-increasing population. Randy is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at VividGro. He has 5 years cannabis industry experience, including grow operations. He has held senior level sales positions at leading telecommunications and technology companies and built several sales teams for several startup companies. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. With that, David and Randy, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate the warm introduction. And as you said, good morning, evening, afternoon, whatever, to whoever's on the call. We appreciate this opportunity to have this discussion around technology in the agricultural world. Always a little difficult to address an audience without knowing the level of education that everybody has. So we try to stay pretty broad and encourage a lot of questions at the end so that we can tailor the information that you get to whatever your needs are. So I'm going to start here quickly. Basically, Stephen introduced us. We are an AgTech firm. We were born out of a hardware lighting company, but we almost from the start recognized that to play in the space, hardware, software, all needs to be interconnected into smart farm technologies to really allow the ag tech space to grow. At the end of the day, you're looking at these three main issues with any controlled environment. You want to lower your operating costs, you want to increase your yields and efficiencies, and what's not in there is decrease any crop failures, which is a huge one, downside risk, and then decrease your cycle times. That's always the holy grail of indoor growing, and everything that we do and everything that the industry does from an ag tech standpoint should really be focused on one of those three things, or all three of those three things. We kind of take a broad approach to where ag tech and technology in general fit in to the industry. It's more, a lot of people think about it as computer chips and robotics and all kinds of things that are really physical in nature, but it's also about sustainability. You know, how the crops are grown, the role technology plays in horticulture, and in particular indoor horticulture, the energy savings, automation controls that significantly lower costs and why they lower costs. All of those things are really the ecosystem of ag tech. It brings physical pieces of the environment into play, the lighting, sensors, irrigation systems, HVAC, all of those hardware components need to be controlled to some extent. You're either controlling them manually, and they also need to kind of be tracked. And so either you're tracking them manually or you're doing both of them through some sort of an automation technology control system. You know, so in short, the indoor horticulture market is being teched up when it comes to growing food and cannabis, and it's really all geared towards operating efficiencies and optimization of environments. The statistic that I like to address when we talk about why technology is important, it's the compression of the cash crop, especially on the cannabis side, and then the ability to overcome significant capital requirements that are needed on the indoor agriculture side. Price compression is going to hit the market on the cannabis side. We will not see $3,000 a pound cannabis for years and years and years. It's widely thought that it costs anywhere between $700 and $900 to produce a pound of cannabis. That can be all over the board depending on what you're doing, but there are places in the country where it is selling for that amount. There's differences between indoor and outdoor, and so you need to be able to hit on one of those three principles of lowering costs, increasing yield, or shortening cycle time in order to maintain competitiveness. On the non-cannabis side, there's really an interesting problem. The World Health Organization predicts that the population by the year 2050 is going to increase to the point where we need 70% more by way of resources, which is going to predominantly have to come through indoor horticulture in order to feed the world population growth. And we're looking at a 70% shortage of that that is needed in terms of resources. And the only way to get there is to create more efficiencies in how we operate. So that's the ecosystem of AgTech and why we look at it and how we look at it. And this is more about how the industry addresses itself than it is about how we address the industry. So we kind of wanted to talk about what the industry itself has to say about what they feel their problems are in the current market with the current products. Randy put this slide together. Randy, you want to talk through a little bit? One thing I'll just point out on the front end is you can see that this was done by Greenhouse Grow. It's a published report. It's not something that we did. But increasing efficiency is by far the number one goal operationally. But 4 or 5 of these other high priorities tie back to increasing efficiency. If you look at efficiency as those 3 principles. Randy, you want to talk a little bit about this slide and about the information that went into gathering it and what you're hearing, particularly out in the field?
Yeah. Like David said, this was an independent that was done by Greenhouse Growers. It's a top magazine in the industry. And really, when you start looking at this, they all kind of tie together, all the different answers. One of the biggest costs for any grower is actually labor. And anything that can reduce labor in automations rather than populate, you want to be able to automate. And that's so if you take a look, it's increased adoption of automation and technology, reduced dependency on labor, increased profit margins. All of those really tie together with how do you do that? And the way that the industry and the world has done it is through automation, whether it's now being able to do a webinar like this, whereas 25 years ago, you'd have to travel to a conference and sit through everything. You couldn't do webinars. They weren't available online. So if you take a look at the technology advances that we've had just in computers and cell phones and everything else, it's happening, and it's happening and growing. The Netherlands is probably one of the most efficient industries out there for growing indoors, whether it's their tulips or their vegetable in their greenhouses. And they actually get their ROIs through that decrease in labor through automation as much as possible, from robotics that are actually doing the crop picking. It was interesting, the other day I saw a video that had a new robotic machine that was out there that was picking strawberries, and it would roll down the aisles and it would only pick the ripe strawberries, and there was no person involved in it at all. I've seen interesting products at the recent MJ Biz show on the cannabis side, where it literally does a lot of your stripping, your trimming. It'll immediately size it, put it onto a conveyor belt, and take all of the, the biggest costs on the cannabis side are that harvesting. And I think it is in any industry when you start to take a look at it. So the more that you can automate, and the more that you can then also increase that quality of product, that's everything that this spoke to. And I think that that's what growers are looking for today, regardless of what they're harvesting and what they're growing. So David, that's kind of the explanation of this. Do you want to, David, take it from here and run to the next slide then?
Apologize, I had myself on mute. Yeah, so I do think it's worth just kind of circling back here again that, if you look at how this all dovetails into the middle, lowering production costs, increasing efficiency, increasing profit margins, the market knows and understands what they need to do. They're just not quite sure how to do it. Agriculture is the least digitized industry in the world. That is one of the components of the top 20 gross national products produced in every country. Healthcare was second, and then there's wide margins between some of the other ones. So we all know how slow healthcare has been to adopt technology. Agriculture is even slower. So, when we talk about technology in the environment, we talk about it in 4 areas: sensing, monitoring, alerting, and then automating or optimizing. The first 3 are fairly easy and are still, unfortunately, fairly scarce in the ag space. We know countless growers of both cannabis and non-cannabis who have been the victims of crop failures as a result of something as simple as somebody kicked the hose in the HVAC system on their way out the door on Friday, and when they came back in on Monday, nobody had checked the crop, and tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars had been lost. Or a refrigeration unit went out that had $200,000 worth of oil that's been extracted, and because they didn't have a sensor or a monitor or a simple email alerting them to this, lots and lots of money gets lost. That's the basics, risk management component of technology in the agricultural space. The further reaching components, so if you go SMAA, sensing, monitoring, alerting, all very simple, very easy. Unfortunately, the industry overcomplicates it and makes it extremely expensive because of the nature of the companies that are pulling it in from industrialized commercial facilities, buildings and prisons and those types of things, and importing it into agriculture. And it's just not as complicated as we make it at that basic level. And it makes it cost prohibitive for people to jump in sometimes. The fourth of automation, and then we call it kind of SMAA plus. The plus is then all the artificial intelligence that you put behind it. That stuff is extremely important over the next 12 to 18 months. If you're doing it now, you're way, way, way ahead of the game, and that's great. But the basics of just knowing what the heck is going on in your environment is still something that the small farmers are not doing. And we know the smaller farmers make up a tremendous amount of the yield that's produced. Larger farmers also are not doing it to the extent that they really should be. If you look at their output and the curve for the efficiency that's required in order to be able to produce crops at a profitable margin on an ongoing basis while also meeting demand. Randy, when you're out in the field and you're talking to growers about the technology, you need to talk a little bit about the size difference and the pain points of each of those growers. I mean, we're mostly out talking to the larger growers, but at shows we talk to smaller growers. What are the consistencies and inconsistencies that you hear between big and small?
Yeah, even with what we do at shows and with some of our outlets, the retail outlets, the carriers, we deal with all the way to people that are just doing a small grow at home. We just recently had a guy that just sent in and he's just growing in a 2x4 tent and he's just doing leafy greens. So the biggest problem is actually for the smaller growers, they don't have people on site that can staff, and therefore outages can devastate anything that they're doing immediately. The largest growers typically have people on staff 7 by 24. So we're doing a large facility for leafy greens in Florida that's doing 800,000 watts of lighting to grow lettuce. And that's a lot of racks and a lot of space. It's basically an airplane hangar full of multi-level racks if you take a look at it. So those people, while they have people, they also have issues with making sure that everything is checked in a timely manner. So on the biggest scale, it's really keeping a schedule and keeping standard operating procedures that can be easily monitored. If you think about, walking into a McDonald's bathroom and somebody has checked off that they cleaned the bathroom, and then you multiply that by a grow area that's got to be whatever plants you're doing, greened and cleaned, checked for spores, checked for anything. No matter whether it's the smallest grower or the largest grower, to be able to get alarmed monitoring and track it is important. But at the smaller grower levels, it almost becomes like having, your own automated assistant. I know people that are caregivers in the cannabis industry, and they literally they can't leave their grows, especially if they're running hydroponics or something like that. They just literally can't leave without fear of losing their crop. We had a large commercial grower that basically lost a room of everything that they'd grown because they lost their dehumidifier and their heat in their dry and cure room. So, just the alarming part of it and monitoring of that, and then adding into that at the largest growers, what they want to be able to do is learn from mistakes and not recreate those mistakes. So capturing that data for the largest growers and then being able to use that so that you don't replicate your mistakes and you replicate your successes. All of the largest growers are looking for that type. Whereas down again on that smaller scale, it becomes, an extra set of hands, eyes, and ears for you on what's going on with your grow. So I think did that answer what you were looking for, David?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think what I would add to that too is the notion of smaller growers is important on the vendor side and on the data side, because if you think about things logically, where monitoring the environment comes into play is in being able to identify problems. Larger growers have more to lose, but they also have less problems statistically than somebody who's growing at home. Somebody who's growing at home is going to have 20 times more crop failures, nutrient deficiencies, anything that you can think of. A, they're not professional, and B, they're not as professional, and B, most importantly, they're not in a fully controlled growing environment. It's that data from smaller growers and the ability to identify those problems, those deficiencies, those crop failures that are needed for the larger commercial growers to be able to take advantage of the data. It'll take 20 years to accumulate all the bad data from large commercial growers that is needed to do the predictive analytics that you could get from the home grow market in a few years. And so as a company, we have to look at that trade-off, and we have to focus on the small farmers as well, because we know that they're a bigger part of the ecosystem that we need to be able to service in order for everybody to thrive. And I think that's important to know as a small farmer. You don't have as little buying power as you might think in other industries. The data is so important. The other difficulty too is we've got a lot of people out there that want to know what the data is doing, but they don't want to share their data. And there's a mistrust around anonymizing data and doing things to protect the data from the grower and recipes and things of that nature. And that takes some time and energy to work with a grower on to get them to understand that you know what you're doing. I mean, in our situation, we're lucky. We were spun out of a publicly traded company. We're backed by institutional private equity firms, and so we've got a lot of expertise on staff, but there are a lot of really cool small companies out there that have product that's good product, but they don't have all that know-how and all of that capital behind them, and they can't really guarantee that the data that they're taking in is properly anonymized and managed properly enough to make sure that their clients are protected. And so that's another challenge that the industry sees as we move through this whole process of automation. Just kind of some basics on what an automation product would look like for those that are out there that have used Priva or Wadsworth or Argus or SmartBee or Titan or any of the other ones that are out there. I mean, it starts with a dashboard. And what we found was that the automation control systems that are out there are very disparate. If they're comprehensive, they're limited in what they can do on the back end, like Priva and Argus. They're also extremely expensive versus the ones that are far more cost effective, but they are used to delivering data to engineers, and it's not delivered in a way that those of us who didn't write the software can understand. It's just not user friendly. And so, the most important thing for data-driven decisions is just a very simple dashboard, temperature, humidity, CO2, soil sensors, if you can get them in. And if we have a VPD algorithm that we calculate. We don't have our agronomist on this call who could explain it. And so if you ask me a question about it, I'm going to kick it to Randy, and he's going to get stuck with trying to explain it. I'm not the technical guy on the agronomy side, but that's a piece, especially for cannabis, that hasn't been teased out and flushed out and has some extreme value. But all of this stuff is really pretty basic, off the shelf, and what everybody should be doing in a grow, regardless of your size, so that you can see what's going on. And from here to sending an alert saying your temperature fell below the benchmark that you set or whatever is very, very simple. It's a long cry from taking that data and turning it into machine learning and artificial intelligence and turning the HVAC on and off because the NASA satellite weather predicts that humidity is going to raise outside by X% and you're in a greenhouse, and that's going to have Y effect, and 2 hours ahead of time you're already neutralizing your environment. That's a big leap, and that's where you want to get, but none of it's possible without all this stuff first. And this stuff should be available to almost everybody at a very low cost, and any farmer should really be focused on making sure that this is part of how you're managing your business going forward. A lot of this stuff is just done on an analog basis with a clipboard or an Excel spreadsheet. As you move down into AgTech on the farm management side and workflows, I think, Randy, I'll let you give me your thoughts after this, but my experience is that recipes are less important than workflows. A lot of companies that are trying to automate ag are trying to come out with recipes. I think farmers in general, cannabis especially, but even non-cannabis, they want to record how they grow, certainly first, before they want to take your advice until they get to know you. And they're much more interested in being able to track what they do than be able to plug in something from your system that you created that they don't know anything about. Randy, do you get the same feedback when you talk to people about that?
Yeah, all the time. It's tracking the workflows and really being able to do it at that higher level are, I think, one of the most important things to them, and they need data to be able to do that. Even to the fact of, should they be vegging for 2 weeks, or should they veg for 2 weeks and 2 days? Or, when do they flush for their flower, or when do they, change their nutrients? They're not looking as much for us to give them that formula, like you said, as much as being able to help them create the best formulas that they can do for their environment and for their plants. So growing strawberries is very different from growing microgreens, which are all very different than growing cannabis. But if you think about really strawberries to cannabis as an example, those are both flowering plants. They're both fruit, is what you're doing with them. And for a plant to get to the ability to be able to fruit, it changes its nutrient uptake during the course of its life. It changes the amount of light that it needs during the course of its life. And so they all want to be able to customize and kind of create their own secret sauce. I don't think that they're really looking for a menu. Now, on the reverse side, the small growers, I think they would like a lot of help with that. There's a lot of small growers. I started growing in my closet, as you know, David, for my wife, again, 10 years ago, so that she could sleep at night. And I went on everything I could, from YouTube to everything, to figure out how to grow again, because when I grew as a young kid, I was growing outdoors and just planting a seed and hoping it did something. And life has changed since then. So I think you're perfectly right. I think they're not looking for us to give them a formula. For the most of the growers, they're looking for us to give the data. And then a lot of that data that we can capture working with them and the nutrient companies that they're working with, we actually can create the formulas for the smaller growers to help ensure their success. So there's a learning from both small grow to large grow and large grow to small grow. That data, I think, becomes the real big piece of it. And then I'll also just address that VPD really quickly, vapor pressure deficit. But basically, plants need to expire water that they take into the atmosphere. And so if you can measure the humidity and create the right formula, you can maximize the amount of water the plant takes in, which increases its nutrients, as well as what it can expire through its leaves and put into the atmosphere. If the atmosphere is too high already in humidity, the plant is not expiring right. It's not breathing properly. So think about your own breathing in a steam room or something like that. It gets more labored to process. It's the same way with a plant. So being able to do that at any level, those are some of the things where people are really looking for, especially if you got an indoor tent or an indoor grow room. It can vary so quickly, your humidity and your heat in your plant, that having some sort of tracking system there that can adjust that very quickly, that's one of the biggest things for growers for increasing their yields, is actually to pay attention to that.
Great.
So,
And I think other things, look, the ability to do this at a very high level is very easy. There are a lot of wireless sensors out there. There are a lot of user interfaces. Ours, plenty of others. You can set up a home kit if you want to. So that part is very easy. Once you start playing with it, that's when you're going to start to get into areas where you need to know the difference, right? If you're measuring temperature, humidity, are you doing it in the right places? Are you going to constantly get warnings because you got it in a corner of a room? Do you need more than one sensor? Do you need inter-canopy if you're growing vertical? Do you need to move air around? All that stuff comes afterwards. But if you can just start with gathering the information and then dumping the information somewhere so that you can go back and analyze it when you're ready, that is a very basic first move that we think everybody should be doing. Wanted to just talk a little bit about technology specifics and use lighting as an example as to how technology has moved in the industry. So one of the things that we talk about in terms of efficiency is energy, and the biggest impact on energy, aside from your HVAC system, is lights. Lights actually put off the most heat in any facility, and thereby they determine what level of tonnage you need when you're installing HVAC. We measure lights in terms of efficacy, and that's a takeoff of the word efficiency. And they need to be as efficient as possible in terms of their power consumption and their power output to compare against any other lights that are out there that are being used currently, primarily HPS, HID, T5s, T8s, right? If you're going to switch to LEDs, just switching to LEDs isn't in and of itself going to be enough. You have to know the efficiency of those LEDs to determine how much you can grow with them. you look back over the last 5-6 years, the efficiency in the fixtures, the high-end fixtures that were out in the marketplace, were in the 1.5 range. In 2015, 1.75 range. You started to see in 2017 the 2.0 range being pierced. And it started to create some awareness in the marketplace that the cheap stuff from China or overseas or anywhere else that doesn't have high efficiency isn't going to produce this anywhere near the results that your HID or HPS bulbs are. You can save a lot of energy, but you need to have high quality LEDs. The LEDs are what dictate the efficiency. So as you move from 2017 to 2018, you look at a huge leap in efficiency. You see a lot of the lighting companies out there starting to top 2.5. You also have to know when you're talking about efficiency at what stage of production they're measuring efficiency. There's a lot of manipulation out there. You can measure efficiency at the LED level, at the board level, at the fixture level without an optic, and at the fixture level with an optic. And each of those progressions reduces your efficiency slightly. And so when you're buying technology, especially in the lighting side, you need to know what technology matters. An efficiency of 2.0 or above will effectively allow you to swap out 1,000 watts of HPS for 600 watts of LED. That's what the industry standard has been, primarily on the cannabis side. And it wasn't until 2017 when we actually hit those marks. So people were switching to LEDs, and they were trying to use these far red spectrums to induce flowering and increase yield and shorten cycle times, and that was all theoretical science. It's until that equilibrium of efficiency hit that we really were able to hit these benchmarks. Now you're seeing situations where you can actually dip below 600 watts potentially and match your output on HPS lights, and your efficiencies there from an energy consumption standpoint are pretty significant. And then the last thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to hand it over to Randy, is kind of how we see the, connected indoor farm. And this is just kind of a really good overview of the ecosystem that makes up an indoor farm and how we look at all of those components and give us an idea of exactly what's going on in an indoor farm. Regardless of whether you officially have these things or unofficially have these things, each of these components really exists. Even if you're growing a marigold in your kitchen, they all kind of happen. So Randy, you want to walk through this and the significance of this slide? Oh, Randy?
You muted that time. My bad. What's happened in Europe? What's happened in Europe is they've had to do as much automation as possible because they're trying to produce for large numbers of people, and they don't have the sunlight over there that we get here, and they don't have the land mass and the land space that we have. So everything they do, they've had to work towards efficiencies where we've become kind of spoiled. We have phenomenal sun throughout the United States and farming areas and a lot of land mass, between the United States and Canada. But as part of that, what they've done is over there, and is they do what's called cogeneration. And cogeneration is the ability to take one engine and then generate a number of pieces that are used from power to gas. And I'll just give you an idea on this one. This would be a natural gas cogeneration on the left. And out of that, you're going to get multiple products. The first thing is it creates heat whenever it's being run. Anytime that you're burning gas or oil, you create heat. That heat can be used now to heat the ground of a greenhouse, for example, or add heat in a grow room, because there are times when you want to add heat to actually dehumidify that a lot of people don't realize that you can actually, when your lights are off at night, you can add heat to the room, and that heat will naturally dehumidify as well. It creates exhaust gas. How is that exhaust gas used? Well, when you're burning natural gas, you wouldn't want to do this with propane, but natural gas creates CO2. So if you're trying to increase your CO2 levels, you get another efficiency out of cogeneration, which is now you're generating all of your own added CO2. When Dave was talking about lighting technologies, one of the biggest issues is that a lot of people keep adding more and more light, and you actually have to create a balance of light and CO2. Once you go over a certain level of light in cannabis, it doesn't do you any good to add the extra light unless you're also adding CO2, because the plant will use those in conjunction to increase. And I think that most growers know that and are trying to figure out, how do I add CO2? Well, in a large facility, you can do cogeneration, and they're actually looking at parks to be able to do this, where you basically, if you think about having a mobile home park, instead it becomes a grow park, and every mobile home becomes a grow building. And rather than each of them having their own centralized air conditioning and their centralized heat, the park provides, with cogeneration, provides air conditioning, and all you need to put into the grow rooms is air handlers now that take in and can either take in cold or put out cold or hot air, and then everything else that's used in here. Another advantage of that is in a lot of areas, you actually can sell excess power that you generate back to the electrical grid. So you can actually use this to run your lighting, augmented lighting. It's typically not a good way to run indoor lighting unless you're a very, very, very large facility. I would say probably 100,000 square feet or more before it's efficient ways to run your lighting. But for everything else, and the fact that you do get the power to run a lot of your other power is always a problem at any large indoor grow. And so being able to offload some of that electrical. So here's one product that's done. The prices are coming down on it. I think Tecogen is probably the leader in the United States. Most of the cogeneration engines are built as huge turbine engines. I think GE is actually the largest builder of these worldwide. I think they actually manufacture in Europe because of this. But the ability to get heat, cool air, blowers, exhaust gas, and electric all out of one, and running the lowest cost fuel that we have today, which is natural gas. A lot of people don't realize that the United States has become a net exporter of oil and natural gas, and a big production of what's happened with the oil is our natural gas reserves have increased to where we have the largest natural gas reserves in the world, and we're the largest exporter of liquid natural gas currently in the world. So those costs coming down bring down the energy cost significantly. So that's basically what this slide shows and how that works.
Yeah, and so I think, I'll end on that note and say that really what it comes down to is AgTech is the convergence of agriculture and natural resources. You don't have agriculture without natural resources, whether it's soil, water, humidity, gas, electricity, and the more those two can work in harmony, the more efficient you can be at producing crops. And as we move towards the future of needing to produce more and different crops, that requirement is going to continue to increase. And so we view it as a responsibility both to the environment and to the industry as well as a business. And it's just kind of a lot of fun. And I think, that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy. I think we're going to take questions, right, Stephen?
Yeah, thank you, David and Randy. We really appreciate you taking the time to share insights on technology advances in agriculture and lead us down the right path. And that's correct. We're now heading into the Q&A portion of the presentation. We've had quite a few questions come through, but there's still time left. If you have any type of inquiry that you would like David or Randy to unpack, please feel free to share them with us through the GoToWebinar chat console. And with that, let's get right into the first question. So these solutions seem really expensive. Can you talk about pricing and payment and ROI?
Yeah, so, unfortunately, the market has positioned itself for commercial vehicles because it's come over from other industries. And so most of the solutions out there right now are extremely expensive because they try to include everything from soup to nuts. If you're going to install a Priva or an Argus system or a Wadsworth system, you're talking tens of thousands for a small grow and hundreds of thousands for a large grow. There are solutions that are now coming out that are inexpensive. It's still a lot of a DIY market. There's a lot of off-the-shelf technology, sensors and dashboards and things like that that are being put together. You can get versions of this stuff for as little as $10 or $20 a month if you can do a little bit of the work yourself and things of that nature, and you can get a fully baked system for $100 or $150 a month probably. It's not going to have all the bells and whistles, but it'll have a nice dashboard, it'll have alerts, it'll have the things that you need, and hopefully that data that it accumulates is then portable to another database. That's really important, is knowing where your data is going, who owns it, and if you want to use it, how do you get it out of where it's at into what you need to put it into. And that is a fairly easy thing in technology, but it's also one of those things that people fail to address and becomes a problem down the road.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that.
David, I'll add to that with just to give people an idea of what's happened. If you think about technology again, look at when I was going to high school, I bought a scientific calculator that cost more than my laptop computer costs today. And you carry phones around with you. The same thing is happening with the technologies here. The recent new product line that we brought out in lighting has dropped the suggested retail price on 600 watt efficient lights from $1,500 to just under $1,000. And we're now able to build lighting that is based upon the application, and many people are doing this, where you can get a 30 watt light for doing microgreens, or you can get a 600 watt light. You no longer have to try to use the same fixture. So lighting costs are coming down. And then the second part of this that are some of the technologies that we're working with, and I know others are, going after, IoT, which is the Internet of Things, to being able to, like what you showed, the monitoring system is all done via wireless and done the web, so that you don't have to buy hardware that you put on site that costs you what a computer would cost you and things. So you're seeing costs coming down significantly. So I would not assume that something is too expensive to get an ROI yet. I would do research on how you can get the right ROI and do that very efficiently.
Yep. And for larger installations, there are financing options and things like that, especially the non-cannabis. The cannabis side gets a little bit harder, but even on that side, they're starting to see some hard money lenders come in on equipment. So.
As well as rebates for anybody that's commercial at all. Rebates can be 20, 30, 40% of the cost of the equipment, but you have to plan properly. You can't go in and put the equipment in and get the rebates afterwards. You got to go in and show the power company what you would do in a normal situation or what you're replacing. And it's not just lighting, it's what you save in pure kilowatts. Because if you take a look at how much you're saving in air conditioning, for every 40 lights, you actually can reduce your air conditioning by 5 tons of air conditioning and the running of that 5 tons of air conditioning. And then the power companies have added rebates if you're able to add controls into there. They actually have kickers that say, well, if you can control all of this as well as help save, we'll give you another 10% or 15%. So working with somebody that is knowledgeable in helping to get those rebates, if you're commercial, they won't do it for individuals or residential homes. But if you have a commercial business with a tax ID number, anybody with a commercial business and tax ID number can go and apply for rebates with their power companies. It just varies by state and by power company what's available.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that question and answer, Dave and Randy. Going into question number 2 here. Why does everyone talk about efficacy when it comes to LED lights and not PAR?
Randy, why don't you take that one?
Okay, so PAR is really a measurement of how many micromoles per watt you're putting out. Efficacy is, in essence, the same thing, but by understanding the efficacy and then the spread of the light, what really becomes the important part is the ppfd that you're getting to your canopy. So if you think about lighting, think about a laser beam. I can get a lot of PAR out of a laser beam, but it doesn't hit very much of the plant. So by understanding what the overall efficacy of that light is and the overall coverage, and another way to think of it is if you take a flashlight and you put it above your desk 1 inch and then you raise that flashlight, you'll notice that the circle of light increases. So understanding how that efficacy plays into that, I think David mentioned earlier that you've got to be a little bit careful with how that's measured and at what level you're measuring efficacy. But even more than that, it's understanding your ppfd and getting lighting layouts done in commercial, and even in a tent, just understanding the basics of a ppfd that you're getting at a home or whether you're doing a rack. So to me, the ppfd and that total PAR is by far the most important, but everybody needs to understand that there's a lot of ways that you can make your efficacy or your PAR look much higher than it is. Just to give you an idea, when you order LED chips, this is all chips and technology. All chips are not created equal, even by the same manufacturer. They'll ship you 100,000 chips, and 20,000 of them are the highest efficacy chips, 40,000 are the middle, and 40,000 are the lowest. And if you just go and test your highest and then tell everybody that's what they're going to get, that's not true. So you want to make sure you're dealing with a reputable LED company that's been in business for a long time, has quality customers behind them, can do their own testing as well as will provide you third-party validated testing, and understand even to the level of what chips are being used for you to understand that. I mean, that PAR and efficacy all comes down to really a lot of it is now who are you dealing with, how are you dealing with them, and what chips are they using, because the chips are tested to a standard of luminous flux. And if the manufacturer is using high luminous flux chips, you're going to get a good quality light. If they're using chips or won't even tell you what chips that they are being able to use and you can't validate it, you're probably not going to get what you think you're going to get with lighting. And I think that's been the problem in LED lighting for years. I think that there's been a lot more promise than there has been delivery. And I think in the last year, because of technology, a lot more delivery, matching or exceeding the promise.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that answer, Randy. Moving along here with question number 3. How big does my operation need to be to recognize benefits from this stuff?
I mean, that kind of was at the core of the whole presentation. I truly believe that growing at home in a tent and having some basic, sensors to monitor your temperature and your humidity and turn your light on and off, you're going to see benefits from it. It just depends on how serious you are, how serious you want to take what you're doing. If you're a hobbyist and you just want to plant and hope, and that's fine. There's no reason to do anything more. But I think you could see benefits from this stuff at all levels. Just there's a law of diminishing returns. You're not going to put a Priva system in the tent. So we all know that. But a couple sensors and an app, no reason not to do it. It will not hurt you.
Great answer, great answer. Moving along with question number 4 here. Why are farmers and cultivators so slow to adopt?
It's a good question. I think that the nature of the industry is that it's still very old school. It's manual labor. Farming is manual labor. I was a wrestler. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, but when I got to college, all the guys that I met were all farmers from Iowa. I mean, they were baling hay and, they were fit and, completely different. I mean, that's the business. And there's been a reluctance to change and adopt more so than in other industries, as I demonstrated with the statistic that I threw out there about digitization. It's the least digitized industry. There's just been pushback. People like to do things the way they like to do them, and it's continued that way for multiple generations. And I don't think that one of two things is happening. Either we're truly getting to a point where we're impacting the availability of natural resources, and some or all of what they write about greenhouse gases and global warming and all that kind of stuff is true, or we're just doing it's the same as it always was, and we're just doing a better job about educating people or, overhyping it. But I think that, that's forcing the change, but you're still talking about changing something that's, thousands of years old. A lot of the farming principles these days are the same as they were, at the dawn of civilization.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that answer. And now with the final one, what is the difference between cannabis and non-cannabis technology?
Randy, why don't you answer the last one?
I don't really think that there is a lot of difference. I'm finding that almost everything plays across any type of plant grow. There are minor features. For example, a lot of people talk about spectrum tuning, and they want to add more red or add more blue. The sun doesn't recognize and give you more red or more blue. So the question is, are you getting enough in that natural sun spectrum? However, there are certain plants, for example, in microgreens, where to get the right nutrients and the right color, you do need to add more red or more blue, specifically in microgreens. And it's because microgreens typically aren't grown outdoors anyway. It's a newer indoor technology. So the difference in the plant technologies are not as much. However, the one big difference I'm seeing on cannabis is a little bit more scale. You will not find other plants grown indoors right now today scaling as fast as cannabis is. And the technologies that are being done for that indoor are actually immediately being played across to somebody that's doing leafy greens or microgreens or whatever. The good thing for everybody is that cannabis, because of the value of the crop and the speed of which it's doing and growing indoor, has expedited all of the technology because of what's being invested. So I believe that almost anything you see technology-wise for cannabis plays across to everything else that you're doing, whether it's lighting controls, fertigation systems, automation of managing your climate or anything. It all plays to any plant. It's just that cannabis is becoming the driver because of the value of the crop. You can't sell tomatoes for $1,000 a pound. Although I will tell people, and they would be surprised, there are strawberries in Singapore that they actually sell for $300 a strawberry. So, people just, and again, it's because they can't grow. The strawberries are such a specialized product over there. So again, the value of the crop is driving the technology, but I believe the technologies are helping everybody across it's crop agnostic basically in where it's helping. There's no special technology that just ends up being used for cannabis. Anything that plays across cannabis is going to play across other markets and other crops.
Awesome. And with that final question coming through, that brings today's webinar to a close. Thank you all for attending and carving out time for today's presentation. It simply would not have been possible without you. We would also like to thank David, Randy, and the entire team at VividGro for sharing your time and expertise during today's webinar. Mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a link to the recording and presentation slides shortly. If you have any further questions in the meantime, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us through webmaster@maximumyield.com, or you can also contact Randy directly at rshipley@vividgrow.com. And once again, thank you very much, everyone. Randy and David, do you have any closing remarks?
I'd just like to thank everybody that that sat through the webinar, and I'm a big time person for learning and learning together. So feel free if you've got some questions to get to me and ask away. If I don't have the answers, I might be able to point you in some ways. We work with a lot of forums and a lot of different grow forums, and I can point you at least in the right direction where you can get some of your answers. So thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone, again.